So when she sees a property, she will go in there. She already know the pretty much the roughly rehab cost. She will give me the complete statistic of the property, the comp, the rental comp. So from that, I just basically leverage it from her network. I got to know the lenders and her set of contractors, closing lawyers. So I basically leverage all her skills, all her network.
Welcome to the Real Estate and Financial Independence Podcast. I'm your host, Chad Carson. You can also call me Coach, and this is a show all about helping you get out of the financial grind so that you can do more of what matters. Thank you for being here for another episode. The title for today's episode is How a New Long-Distance Investor Bought 6 Properties in 1 Year. This is an interview with Ray Zhao. He is a student in my course, Real Estate Deal School. He was in fall of 2020 was when he took the course. And so I'm recording this in February almost of 2022. And so we're looking back over the steps he took and the progress he made to buy those 6 properties and starting from scratch. So this is one of the most fun things I get to do is really to unpack the details of his progression. And the reality, and so many people get frustrated in the early stages, but the reality that I want to share with you in today's episode is that the steps you take forward are a little bit messy sometimes. There's no perfect path. And what I do in the course and what I've helped people now for about a decade, when I'm helping people get started in real estate investing, is give you some milestones, to give you some guide paths to help you kind of climb the mountain, to be your co-pilot, your guide up the mountain. But really beautifully, you can see with Ray's story is you then take that and own that. And the details are a little more personalized for you. So I hope that details of his story and what he did, and particularly if you're a long distance investor trying to buy in another part of the country like he is doing, I think you'll learn a lot from that. But really anybody who's trying to buy properties in 2021 and 22, we talk about the competitive market. We talk about some of the approaches he took. We talk about the types of properties he bought, the team members were critical for him to get, and much, much more. So this will be a fun conversation with Ray Zhao. Now, before we get to this week's interview, it's time for my weekly behind the scenes segment where I share a short snippet of what's going on with me and my real estate investing, finances, or business behind the scenes. And this week, I've been thinking about some conversations I used to have with a mentor of mine, and I still actually have conversations with him early on in my real estate investing career. His name is Louis Stone. He was a business professor at Clemson. That's how I met him and kind of got into the real estate investing game after graduating from college. But he used to tell me all sorts of aphorisms, and he would use stories or just examples. And he would say things like, by the inch, life is a cinch. It would just be easy to remember, just take it a little bit at a time. But there's one particular lesson he would talk to me about where he said, Chad, don't try to reinvent the wheel. It's kind of a cliche and people say that a lot, but every time I was learning something new in the business, his point was somebody has already done what you're trying to do. Specifically, whether it's a tactic, whether it's a way of buying properties, a way of financing properties, whether it's a new business. Like right now for me, I'm expanding my YouTube presence, and don't reinvent the wheel with that, Chad. There's people who know how to do this. That's why I've hired people to coach me, and I've taken courses on YouTube because it's a shortcut. It's a way of accelerating how you make progress in whatever you're trying to do. It's the reason we go to school. It's the reason as kids, we copy what our parents or our adults in our lives do. The copying of it and not reinventing the wheel is how we learn things and it's how we get better at things. And so I've been thinking about that with my own business and how can I not reinvent the wheel in the things I'm doing. And this is also relevant for today's conversation that you're going to hear with Ray. He did a great job of going through the course that I offer, Real Estate Deal School, and not reinventing the wheel. I asked him questions, as you'll hear in the interview, and a lot of his answers were, well, I just used the scripts that you gave us in the course to call the real estate agent. And I just followed those scripts and I used those. Or I just used your spreadsheet and I did that. And it's a great answer in a way as a beginner because it's showing that he's using the tools that are available to him and he's investing in that, not reinventing the wheel, investing in that shortcut, so to speak. So I just want to encourage you to do that. I'm definitely doing that in my life and whatever I'm trying to do, whether it's parenting, whether it's a YouTube expansion, whether it's writing a book, which I'm going to be doing later this year. Don't reinvent the wheel. Find ways to get a shortcut. And shortcut doesn't have to be a bad word. And the trick there is finding a person or a source of information that you trust. That's the challenge in the age of information on the internet. And really, that's the mission of what I'm trying to do here with this podcast and at Coach Carson, is to be a trusted source for you. If it makes sense for you, if the business model of a small and mighty real estate investor of building up a portfolio of properties that you can retire off of or have more financial freedom off of, if that's what you're interested in, that's what I'm all about. And so I'm trying to teach the tactics of that, both in this free forum of the podcast, but also in online courses and these coaching kind of communities where I'm helping other people out. So whatever format of doing that looks like for you, I just encourage you to do it. It's something I'm focusing on myself as well. Now let's get started with today's interview. Hey, Ray, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Coach. It's good to see you again.
Yeah, you as well. So I really appreciate you coming on. I've gotten to know you, Ray, over the last year or so. So I guess it's fall of 2020. It was when you took the course Real Estate Start School, which is now known as Real Estate Deal School. But it's just been fun to see the beginning and all the way to where you are now and kind of watch the process. And that's what I hope to talk about today, is just to share your journey as a real estate investor and how you got started, what you're looking to do. But I thought it'd be fun just to share with the audience a little bit more about yourself. Where are you from? Tell me a little bit more about your background and how kind of before you got into real estate investing.
Okay, sure. Yeah. Well, originally I'm from China. I came here when I was 14, went to school here, got into medical school, met my wife in New York during residency, came back to California where my parents lived, and since 2009. And I'm a ER physician, so I'm working full time. My wife is a CPA. And for the last 10 years, we've just been working. And I somehow heard your name from White Coast Investor.
Yes.
You did you were a guest on the podcast. Right. And that was actually a couple years ago. But I didn't think too much of it. And until 2020, I just, me and my wife decided to really get into something different than just our daily work. And we felt we're just stuck for the last 10 years. Just keep working, getting the paycheck, paying the bills, but just stuck in the routine, and there's really nowhere else to go. So I decided to do a little research on you, and I found that you have a real estate starting school opened up in November. But before that, actually, I enrolled one of your course called a rental property analysis. Right. And I downloaded your Excel sheet, saw all your videos. That was like a very enlightening moment. It was like an aha moment for me. And I realized, hey, real estate making sense to me. Yeah. It makes sense for a lot of things. And I subsequently, I enrolled the Real Estate Start School in November 2020. And then afterwards, starting in February, and we started looking to invest in real estate in Charlotte area.
Okay. Well, I want to get into a lot of details about that. So thank you for that introduction. And one question I had is, your wife's a CPA, you're an ER physician, so I can only assume that your schedules are really busy. Like, what kind of schedule are you on for an ER physician? Are you a few days on, a few days off, or do you go? How do your shifts work?
Yeah, just like you said, a few days on, a few days off. Most of the time, I work 3 or 4 shifts a week, and somewhere between 10 to 12 shifts a month. And I'm independent contractor, so I get 1099, and some place I get W-2. My wife was a full-time CPA, so she works full-time, basically 8 to 5 every day, okay. Monday to Friday. So we just juggle our schedules.
Got it. Yeah. When you first decided to have that conversation, it sounds like you and your wife talked about it. Was the motivation for you sort of a long-term, hey, in 20 years, I want to have enough wealth to eventually retire, or was it more to have more flexibility? I'm just curious, just before you even got into the real estate strategy itself, like what was your core financial motivation? What were you hoping to get out of it?
My core financial motivation is that eventually I want to have a leverage over time, really have more time for myself, for the family. and both me and my wife are Christian. We're very devoted to our community, to our church community. We really want to spend time with our fellow church congregation members, spend time reading the Bible, spend time to taking care of their needs and taking care of our own spiritual needs too. But in order to fulfill that, we have to have time, and we simply just working, and paying bills. It just seems and there's no end to it. Right. And so that's why we decided to have a discussion for a long-term strategy.
Yeah, love it. That's beautiful. Well, great. Well, so when you first started, you mentioned learning how to analyze the numbers and run the numbers. That sort of was an aha moment for you. Let's talk about your strategy, because I think something a lot of beginners in real estate investing get overwhelmed because there's so many different options. You could go buy a mobile home park, you could buy a house, you could buy apartment buildings, you could do short-term rentals. There's just so many possibilities. Ultimately, you decided you said you invested in Charlotte, and I want to talk about the market here in a minute, but you decided to invest long distance, and you're in Los Angeles. What was your thought behind that? Like, what was the decision to not invest in your hometown and invest somewhere else?
Well, basically, I just, like you said, looking at numbers. I look at through all the numbers here in California. There's some, most of the properties, or most important, the fundamental strategy for us is to focus on single family residence, SFR. Or we're simply a completely beginner, novice beginner, and we have no idea how real estate works. We just want to try something simple. So we look at the California, LA area, 3-bedroom, 2-bath around our area, usually 600 to 700K, and monthly rental is only 2,500, 2,700. It's just not. Definitely far away from the 1% rule that you recommended. So we're just looking. So that's why I decided looking somewhere outside of California. In Charlotte, we're looking in the Charlotte area because our church has multiple branches in different parts of the United States. For one part is in Charlotte. During 2019 to 2020, there are 10 families move out there. So we noticed that there's such a trend that people moving out to Southeast, and we have a burden to support a church community there. So that's why we decided to invest in Charlotte. And then we're looking at the numbers. The Charlotte area, we found out that many of the properties SFR 3-bedroom, 2-bath, about 250K to 300K. And their rental income is pretty good, so 1,700 to 2,000, a lot better than California.
Yeah, got it. So I love it. So that part of what we do in the course, which I know, is that there's multiple motivations behind choosing a location. So you chose Charlotte. You had some personal motivations, and you just knew people moving there and had the church connection. And then you also look at the numbers, and the numbers had to do with both the price to rent ratio. So you mentioned the 1% rule. I want to go back to that just quickly so people understand what that means. There's a rule of thumb that a lot of people in the real estate investing space talk about, that if you want to get a pretty good cash flow in a single family house or a small multifamily, that if your rent on the property is 1% of what you invest in it. So if we mentioned $250,000 property, if you buy $250,000 property and the rent is close to $2,500 per month, that's 1%, that would meet the 1% rule. In reality, and I know we're going to get into the numbers on your deals, Ray, not all deals, especially in quality locations, even in Charlotte, meet the 1% rule. But if it's $1,700, instead of the ratio in California was a $600,000 or $700,000 house and a rented for $2,500, that was about 0.3% rule or so. And it's just the long and short of it is that that's only going to produce a very tiny cash flow that's going to be very difficult to cover the mortgage. If you're using leverage, you're probably going to have negative cash flow. And for some people, if you're going to move into the house, if you're going to do a house hack, it can still make sense in some cases, or you put a lot of money down. There tends to be a lot of growth in some of these big high price markets, but Charlotte was a great choice. I know Charlotte really well, and a lot of the Southeast has kind of a more balanced price to rent ratio, while at the same time, this is a growth area. There's people moving into Charlotte. There's a net population growth. There's a net economic growth. There's a diversity of companies there. So I think it was an excellent choice, and I'm glad you chose Charlotte. Let's talk about the types of properties you bought. So you have your big picture Charlotte. How did you decide where within Charlotte to buy, and how did you decide? You mentioned single family houses, but what type of single family houses did you start looking at?
I knew the area, the Charlotte area is the more close to downtown, probably more expensive. Usually the south part of Charlotte looks much very expensive. That's all of my price range. Like you said, I try to stick to the 1% rule, but it's very, very difficult, depends on the location. Most of my focus area is the outskirt of Charlotte area, so such as Concord, Harrisburg, Matthew, Gastonia. Those are the area has a lot of potential to grow for the next 5 to 10 years. And the houses are newer and usually built, for example, Concord, the houses are usually built in 2000 or newer. So I expect less maintenance, less capital expenditure, and less rehab costs.
Yeah, very smart. So it's not only, this is a mistake I made, and you didn't make this mistake as a beginner, but I used to make the mistake of only looking at the numbers and not looking at the property itself. And you chose newer properties, you chose locations that were in your budget, but also had growth potential. So I thought that was just really smart that you found a good balance between the two. You didn't get exactly what you wanted on the numbers, quite on the 1% rule, but you also got newer properties in a good location. So all of that makes sense. And I think the point I just want to emphasize, what you did really good job of, is just starting with the location. Like the numbers and the deal finding and the financing is all a part of it, but you've got to get a good place to buy properties first. And that's what you did. And one other question on the location though, Ray, like how did you learn, like you just sounded off like 4 or 5 locations within Charlotte, Concord, Gastonia. Like how did you start learning about it since you lived in California? How did you get that knowledge?
My first contact actually is one of the church leaders in Charlotte, and he happened to be a elderly gentleman. He used to be a real estate lawyer, and has been living in Charlotte area for about 22 years, and so he's very familiar with the Charlotte area. So he himself actually lived in Concord, and he told me about the. I asked him, what kind of area does a church family wants to live to, so I want a long-term strategy for the church members and also for myself. So I know if I have somebody who can live in those kind of area for long-term, that's a good strategy for me also. And so he told me about Concord, a certain area of Concord, certain area of Matthew. And one of the advice he gave to me is actually called neighborhoodscout.com. If you go on this website, you pay $50 a month. You actually get to see the detailed analysis of the real estate status on the area. By the way, disclosure, I have no affiliation with Neighborhood Scout, but just a strategy I learned.
Yep. Well, I'll put a link to that in the show notes. That's great. That's a good resource for people to check out. So you did your homework, I guess is the point. You happen to have some connections there, but you also use Neighborhood Scout. So there's both high tech versions of studying your neighborhoods, and there's also low tech. You did both of those, and you learned the market first. That was I always compare it to like lifting weights. If somebody wanted to get good at sports, we're watching the football these days, like the NFL playoffs. If you wanted to get good at football, you'd have to train and run and lift weights. Well, to be good as a real estate investor, like the number one training I always recommend is studying your market. And both the high-tech version, looking at Neighborhood Scout, looking at Zillow, looking at Rentometer. But then I think the best thing you did was talking to that local person on the ground and saying, what are the places where people want to live? What are the neighborhoods where people are comfortable? Because you're basically shortcutting your knowledge. You're not having to, that person's been there 20 years and you're getting to borrow their knowledge. And that's a super helpful tip. So Ray, the next thing, I'm kind of progressing through the order that we went in the course. So we started off with the deal location. The next part was deal analysis, running the numbers. And we've talked about that a little bit, but can you talk to Did you have any core criteria that you were looking for? You mentioned the 1% rule. Was there anything else that would identify for you from the numbers standpoint that it would be a good deal?
Definitely cash on cash return, and also the ROI, and also the internal rate of return. And I also look at a cash flow. And my spreadsheets, basically I copy yours, and I remember you mentioned a certain criteria for each category, so I use those as a parameter for myself. And I can never achieve the recommendation you have put out there because you're such a master, and I'm just trying to put them all together. See, if it has a good ROI and if it makes sense, and then that's usually how it works.
No, that's great. I like how you use multiple different metrics. So, like you mentioned, cash on cash return. You mentioned return on investment. Could you differentiate those two for yourself? Because I think cash on cash return is one thing, and then a total return on investment. How do you differentiate those in your mind?
Total return of an investment is actually projecting in the long term, like for example, 5 years or 10 years, and cash on cash return is simply just on the very sort of more like an internal rate of return for the time that you set for that year. That's my basic understanding, very limited understanding.
No, yeah, I think that's right. And the cash on cash return, in many cases, like you're using the cash flow from the rental and saying how much of my down payment am I getting back in the first year? So you're just looking at like a 1 year basis. And then the total return though, and you mentioned internal rate of return, which is a metric I use a lot in the rental analysis course that you mentioned, and in your own spreadsheet. But that kind of takes into account all of the different returns. So it's not only cash on cash return, but it's also the pay down of your loan over the next 5 years. And it's also the appreciation on the property. If the property goes up by $5,000 or $10,000 a year, if you could sell that 5 years from now, that's a real return you're getting as well. So I think that's smart to have. It's almost like an airplane. When you have multiple gauges on the airplane, you have the speed, you got the height, you got the whatever all those things are. I'm not a good pilot, but if you just looked at one, if you just looked at cash on cash return, you might say, oh, that's a bad deal or that's a good deal. But if you look at all of those together, then it sort of gives you a realistic picture of what's going on. So well done on that. All right, so let's keep on going down the list. You got your location, Charlotte. You picked some neighborhoods that were affordable but still had good growth potential. You've got some rough metrics on what you're looking for. Let's talk about financing. You mentioned both you and your wife have good jobs. You make assume good income. How did you choose to buy these properties and get the money for your deals?
We do have some cash saved up, so we use that cash to pay the down payment. 20%, and then we leverage it financing because my wife, both of me, my wife have a W-2 job. I also have a 1099, so it helps it's very easy to apply to get a loan. And so far the rate is good. We also asked my mom to help us to pay 50% down payment on a property. So basically, we use other people's money to help us to financing for a property. And then the fifth one, and actually, I have my solo 401k from the 1099 job. So I use a solo 401k to buy a property. And also we have a HELOC from our primary residence. We use that as a bridge loan to help us to make a cash deal on the properties, and afterwards doing cash out refi. And that's how we take out 75% of cash out from a property and combine with a HELOC, combine with a little bit of our own cash to buy the next purchase.
Fantastic. So you use multiple sources, and we're going to get in. For people listening, we're going to get into one or two of his actual deals and look at the mechanics of each one. But just just from a higher level, you started off with the down payment that you'd saved, and you got a traditional 30-year loan. So because you had good credit, because you had good job income, you're kind of the perfect candidate for a traditional 30-year loan. But you're buying it instead of buying it as an owner-occupant loan, you're buying this as an investment traditional mortgage. And you had about 3.75%, if I remember right, whenever you bought your first one. Is that about right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So good, really good rate, 30-year loan, 20% down. That's one bucket, but you bought 6 properties in the last year. So you had to kind of get creative and use multiple sources. You partnered with a family member to put up some of the down payment if you didn't have the full amount. And then you still got a traditional loan. And then you also refinanced, used a HELOC or home equity line of credit on your personal residence. And you used that cash to pay cash for a rental property. Did I understand that right?
Yeah. Use that cash to buy property. And after we purchase a property, we use the cash on refi and take out 75% of the cash back. And then we use a little bit of our own cash to combine again to purchase the next property. And this year we actually just finished a cash on refi on top of a HELOC we have from our primary residence. So now we have a HELOC, also cash from our primary residence at 3.2%. So we use that cash combined with the HELOC we just bought our 7th property.
Oh wow! So since we emailed last, you got number 7.
Yeah, that was last week.
All right, Ray. Wonderful. Well, great. Well, all right. So we're going to get to the deals here in a second, but so we picked a location. You got deal analysis. You got financing down. One of the most important things, and I know you've mentioned this several times to me, that all of that is great, but it's all kind of a theory until you get a team together on the ground. And particularly in your situation, I think it's pretty common, Ray, that and you're super busy. You got this. You're working in an ER. You can't take cell phone calls when you're in the ER. And your wife you got clients, and so like a lot of us, you're working a full-time job, and you're also across the country. You know, Charlotte's on the East Coast. You're on the West Coast. So I'd love to hear more about the team you built because you had to use somebody else's time to help you do this. And so tell me kind of how that process went.
I just want to mention I really appreciated the start off from you, and you introduced me to your friend Sean, who introduced me to a property manager William Ozero, and also another friend of yours Lou, and he introduced me to his home inspector, his closing lawyer, and from that I just keep calling them and interview them, and they will introduce their contacts, their networks, and I just get to know the contractors, from contractor contact the closing lawyer to agents and property manager. It was like crawling the spider web. It took me 6 months, and I found a really good agent. She's actually very good. She's very hardworking, very smart, very transparent, very honest, and she's very knowledgeable too. So when she sees a property, she will go in there. She already know pretty much the roughly rehab costs, and she will give me the complete statistic of the property, the comp and the rental comp, possible rehab costs and everything. So her name is Apple Trent, by the way. So okay. She's from Verge Property Management. And so from that, I just basically leveraged it from her network. I got to know the lenders and her set of contractors, closing lawyers, and everything else. So I basically leveraged all her skills, all her network.
Well, you mentioned a couple of things I want to go back to, that it took you 6 months to build the team. And it started with, you asked me, and I had a few connections in Charlotte. I just happened to have, Sean McKay is one person you mentioned. I'll put a link for Sean in there. And then also Lou Gambutis is another one that referred some people to you. But it starts with 1 or 2 referrals. It sounds like that, you got to just talk to people locally. And what Ray did was, I happen to have some connections there, but what anybody can do is, like, I recommend joining or participating in like online forums or online meetups of other real estate investors, like a Facebook group in the Charlotte and real estate investors. There'll be several Facebook groups there. There'll be several real estate investor associations. That spider web you mentioned of networking that's what happens at those networking meetings. They have property managers, they have real estate agents, or there's real estate agents in those groups who you can finally meet. So that's how you initially contact the people. But I'd love to ask you, Ray, on the vetting of the people. So you mentioned your agent was great and she was trustworthy and she was transparent. What was the process you went through to try to verify this person who you don't even know yet is a person that you're comfortable working with? Like, did you just have one phone call? Did you have several phone calls? Do you remember any of the questions you try to ask? I think that's a detail that a lot of people get hung up on.
Oh, actually, I follow your little protocol and your template how to interview the property manager and the agents. I just, I just memorize those questions. I read off those questions,
Great.
And when I get the right answer, I kind of knew. But this particular agent, her name's Apple. It was just very coincidental. I called on that day when I found the property, and I called several of my agents. None of them answered me, and she was the last one on the list. I called her. She was actually not even in Charlotte. She was at the Bronx Zoo in New York, taking care of her daughter. And the deal we're supposed to turn in the offer in 2 hours. So she picked up the phone. So she said, "No problem. I'll work on it." And then she did it. Then she submitted the offer before the deadline. So I knew that she was hardworking, and she was responsible. So afterwards, and once we got the property, she actually went to the property. She walked through the property to check it out to make sure everything's good, make sure everything's proper. And so I knew that she has the knowledge of she's transparent. She's not just someone just want to closing the deal. She's actually responsible. Wants to make sure this is what what I want. And so throughout the time, many interactions and certain things, I will ask her if should be the right way to do it. She will correct me. She will say this is probably not a proper way. Things like that. I just realized that she has a good character. So that's eventually how I got to know her.
Yeah,
how I trust her.
Yeah. So you basically tested out how she did in real life, and she performed. She did it, and she actually answered her phone. That's a good start. Yeah. Yeah, I am amazed, whether it's contractors or agents or property managers, if somebody's too busy to answer or even call me back. Like, we're trying to get a plumber to come to our house right now, and nobody will call me back. So it's like, all right, are there any plumbers who want to fix the toilet? So that's okay. So you followed the script, which of course we go over in the course, and that's a big thing that people follow that script. The other question I had was, like, just from a time management standpoint, you're busy. Like, how did you fit in these calls? Like, were you doing it in the evening? Were you doing it at lunch breaks? Like, I'm just curious how you were able to manage your own time, because this is a part-time thing for you. You've got all your other stuff going on as well.
Oh, I just have to make time. And a lot of time I find most efficient way is the text messaging. So during text messaging, there's just basically no chit-chatting, just ask the very most important questions and get an answer. So I text messaging a lot of people and asking a lot of questions, and that's one way I find is very efficient. But many times I just had to squeeze in phone calls, and many times on my way to work, and that's when I'm driving by myself. That's the only personal time I have, so I use that to making phone calls.
Yeah. Basically, you squeeze all this into your life. It is a sacrifice, right? I mean, you could be doing other things when you're sitting in the car. You could be doing other things, but you do have to prioritize this. And it is one of the objections I get, Ray, a lot from people when they first start is like, oh, real estate's not passive. Well, that's true. Like, when you first start, like what you're doing, like was the last year passive for you, or were you pretty active doing the business?
Pretty active. Yeah, pretty active. Yeah.
But the good thing is, and here's the caveat, it's like it starts off really active. Like, you had to work pretty hard this year to get this done. But now, once you have 6 properties or 7 properties, if you were to just stop right now and just take a break for a couple of years, that property manager, you still have a little bit of work, but like managing my existing properties with a manager, it takes me 30 minutes, an hour a week. It's not like I could do a few texts just like you're doing here and there. I could do that from anywhere in the world. So it's not like it goes from like a part-time job to a very, very, very part-time job. Just, people look at their Bitcoin and their stocks as much as I text my real estate agent or property manager. So that's the cool thing about real estate. It starts off active, it becomes very passive. But it definitely, you got to be prepared for that work on the front end. That's something that has to be there. Or otherwise, maybe you should do something else. There's you can invest in index funds, which both of us do, and there's other options out there. But to buy properties like you're doing directly does take a little bit of work.
Yes.
So Ray, let's talk about your actual deal. So I've been teasing that a little bit. So you've gotten all this prepared, like all this preparation work, a team, your money, your market, your deal analysis. let's talk about your first deal. Like tell me, how did that come about? Where did it come from? And then after that, we can jump into some of the numbers.
Okay, yeah. Well, it's actually since 2020, the Charlotte become actually last 5 years. Charlotte has been a very hot market. It's a top five mostly immigrated city in the United States. So it's been increasing 10% each year. And just starting last year, actually, I started looking in the late 2020 after during taking your course, and I realized it's just very hard to find a property. Most of the property just disappear within a day or so. So me and my first agent, we were just looking, we're making offers, and we're not getting any. And we increase our due diligence and increase our purchase price, not getting any, just very, very frustrating. And then this first property, all it has is just a front picture. It didn't have any other picture inside. So I guess not that many people noticing this property. I told my agent to, make an offer on it. And that was after 12 offers already during 2 months. And we got accepted. So that's how we got it.
All right, I want to pause there. I want to go into these numbers for a second, but you said you made 11 offers or 12 offers before you got
12
that first
offers. Yeah.
Wow. So I just want to emphasize that because you hear stories sometimes somebody makes their first offer and gets it accepted, but it's very rare in my experience. It's more common like that 2 months of making offers like you had to do. That's, especially on your first deal, it's frustrating. It's very frustrating, but that's much more common. And I think you had to, was it frustrating to the point where you almost gave up on it? Or did you consider saying, I can't do this, or I'm going to have to go somewhere else? Or what was your thought process when you kept getting rejected during those 11 or 12 offers?
I just knew that I didn't know the market that well. I just realized that I just don't know. The market was changing so fast, and everybody, initially the agent would advise you just give a due diligence $500, and that should be sufficient. You're offering with a conventional, that should be pretty competitive. And then I just increase it, then we increase to 1,000 and 2,000 and 3,000. They just keep getting more. And even the purchase price is not just, you can't just offer whatever the asking price. You have to offer, maybe 2,000, 5,000 more. And then eventually I decided to make it 10,000 more. That first property was asking 2,005K, and we offer 220K, and that's how we got a bid.
Okay, got it. So you made it was listed for 205,000. You made an offer of 220,000, so 15,000 above the asking price. And let's talk about the house, what it was like. Tell me about the size, the bedrooms and baths, things like that.
It's a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, and it's cul-de-sac. It's I would say it's in a C-class location, and it's a little close to the outdoor music pavilion area. So during the summer, if they have a music concert, it could be very noisy. And the house is about 1,300 square footage, and the inside is actually very poorly maintained. I have to spend another 20K to rehab, renovate it, changing the roof and changing the floor, repaint it, make sure that everything is up to date.
So you paid $220,000 for it. You put another $20,000 in, so you've got $240,000. Do you remember approximately what your closing costs were? Was it a few $1,000 in closing costs?
The closing cost is about around $6,000.
$6,000.
Yeah.
Okay, got it. All right, so you got about 246 or so. I'm going to use 245 just as a round number because that makes it easier for my math. But so once you spent $20,000 to fix up it was poorly maintained on the inside. You did some new flooring. You did some cosmetic improvements. You also had to redo a roof, if I remember right. Is that right?
Right.
Right. Replace the roof. So you've got some of the kind of just cosmetic, fundamental kind of stuff done. It wasn't like a major rehab, but it was definitely had some cosmetic issues. What was it once you got it rented or once you got it fixed up? What did you end up renting it for at that point?
Before I go into that, I actually renegotiated with the seller. and they give me $10,000 money back because all the poor condition that we have to take care.
Okay.
And so it ended up to 236K. So the monthly rent ended up be $1,700 a month.
Okay. Got it. All right. So 236,000 invested, $1,700 in rent, and you had to put a 20% down payment on the original purchase price. Is that right?
Right. And had 20% down, and we got the conventional loan 30 years fixed at 3.75%.
Got it. All right. Is that around an $800 a month payment? I don't know if I'm putting you on the spot there with your payments here, but I think I ran the numbers on it before. It seemed like it was around $800 or so for your payment.
Yeah. And plus property tax, homeowner insurance is about almost $1,000.
Got it. Okay. So with all that together, $1,000, you're getting $1,700 coming in, and then if you count on that, you're gonna have some property management fees, you're gonna have some maintenance,
8%.
Maintenance, things like that. But when it's all said and done, I guess what would be your approximate cash flow when you pay all of your expenses on that first property?
Probably $500 a month. Yeah.
Okay. So when you took a deep breath after this first deal, was that a success for you? Were you happy with where you ended up?
From the number wise, it's very good. But then and I realized that the location wasn't the one that I expected, and I just didn't know the area that well. I thought it was okay, but I didn't find out that it had some outdoor music pavilion nearby, so about 3 or 4 miles away. So that could be a potential problem in the future. Yeah. So that's the problem with it. Yeah.
Yeah.
But the number wise is great.
Got it. So that's probably, I think when we first talked about this deal, when you first got it, you were thinking maybe like a B, maybe a B plus, A minus kind of location, but you sort of dropped it from that to a C at this point, right?
Right.
Yeah. But so have you been able to keep it rented though? So you've had it about a year. Has there been any problems finding a tenant to rent it out?
Not at all. The tenant, we got the first tenant in within a week after rehab, and they're still there. We haven't had any problem. This is probably one of the best cash flow property we ever had so far.
Yeah, great. And I'm trying to think roughly how much cash you had in this deal. I'm trying to get all the details just so people listening, I know that everybody loves details. So if you paid $210 for the property because you had a $10,000 discount and you put 20% down, so you maybe had 40 grand or so, 45 grand, and it's a down payment. Is that about, and then plus the rehab costs?
Approximately, yeah.
Yeah, I'm thinking it's roughly like 60 grand, 65, or plus closing costs, maybe 65 grand. So I'm just trying to get a rough cash on cash because I know you mentioned that was one of your criteria. So if you're making $500 a month in cash flow, that's $6,000 per year. Let's just say you had 65,000 cash in it. That's about a 10% cash on cash return. And that for a single family house, that's super strong. I mean, it's hard to get. And the other thing I want to emphasize is that this deal didn't meet the 1% rule, but because you were able to get a really low interest rate, 30-year fixed, because you were able to find a good tenant at a pretty good rate, even though it didn't meet the 1% rule, this is still a positive cash flow property. Yeah. All right. So that's property number one. You've learned some things. The location's not quite as good as you like, but you've got your team members going. You know how to make an offer. You learned how the market's working a little bit better. Let's talk about what you did next. So how long did it take before you started looking for other deals to supplement this first one?
That deal was made an offer in February, closing in March, and so in April 2021, we found another second property, which is a much better location, and also in Concord. And this one was actually the seller was in distress. The wife has a terminal cancer, so they want to sell the property as soon as they can. And it's also single family residence, 3 bedroom, 3 bath, and 2,100 square footage, and it has a pretty big yard. And their asking price was $280K. We offered $300K, and because the seller wants to take some time to move out the property, we gave them 1 extra month to move out. So that's how we got the offer.
All right, so that's a strong offer. You're pre-qualified for financing. You got a big earnest money deposit. you pay $20,000 over the asking price, and you give them a month to move out. So yeah, so that was. Were you competing with other offers on that, Ray? With other people who made an offer as well?
Oh yeah, there was like a 20 plus offers, and we were just surprised we got it, and yeah.
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 Wow. So when you mentioned the description of what this property is like, let's talk some of the numbers. Like, did this property need any repairs after you bought it, or was this in better shape?
Oh, this was in much better shape. I would say this is more of a B plus location. The property itself is I would say it's a A minus condition. As soon as my agent walking through, when she walked through the property, she realized it's a great condition. We didn't have to do much except just paint the wall, and everything else, the floor, the window, the roof was pretty good condition.
Got it.
So we didn't spend much, probably only $3,000 just to paint all the walls.
Got it. And this one was a 2003 kind of a newer house, if I remember right. Is that correct?
This one's 2100, 2003, yeah.
Yeah, so built relatively recent as well. And the reason I mentioned that, I have a lot of older houses in my portfolio, and one of the, I love old houses. I'm kind of a sucker for them, but they also have a lot of problems. You're buying a property from the 1930s or 40s. It might have old wiring. It might have old plumbing. The sewer line might be old and might collapse every once in a while. So the benefit of buying a property that's built in 2003 was the codes were different at that time, and some of the just the mechanicals and you still might have to replace a heating and air unit because that's 15, 20 years old, but the plumbing, the electrical, the structure of the house is going to be pretty solid. So that's a kind of gives you some peace of mind, at least as a landlord. Ray, so you bought it, you paid $300,000 for it. You had $3,000 in repairs, maybe another $5,000 or $6,000 in closing costs. What were the rent on this property?
So the rent is $2,000 monthly and $50 a monthly additional for owning a pet.
Got it. Okay, got it. So about $350 more than your prior property. You paid a little bit more for it. Without going into all the details of the numbers, do you remember roughly what you're able to cash flow in this property, like what your expenses were? Then we could kind of back that out.
So basically, I pay a part of some of the property tax, insurance, the counting the vacancy, 7% rate, and some capital expenditure, and your maintenance repair 7.5% according to your sheet. So my net operating income on year one is 12,000, but on year two is 14,000. So according to your rental analysis sheet, my monthly net income after financing is $151K.
So the net operating income is about $14,000 a year once it's stabilized, and so that's a little bit over $1,000 a month. After all said and done. So we take the $2,000 a month in rent, we subtract all your taxes, insurance, maintenance, management, all that. And when you do it on a yearly basis, you got about $14,000 a year in year two, once it's stabilized a little bit. And so when you subtract your mortgage payment, Ray, then will you tell me that number again? Just want to I'm taking notes on that as well.
Oh, my mortgage payment is about $1,025.
Got it. Okay. All right. So you're looking at about a couple $1,000 a month, $1,500 a month, or $1,500 or $2,000 per year in cash flow, somewhere in there.
Yes.
Got it. Okay. So positive cash flow as well. And so I just want to take a step back. So like we're getting way into the weeds here with details, but what I'm hoping for people to see is that there's different types of deals that you find out there. Like I want to hear what you think, how you would define your deals, Ray, too. But to me, these are quality single family house rental properties. And the profile of that is that it's going to be tough to make a huge cash flow on single family houses. So the fact that you're getting some cash flow, like on the first property, was a lot stronger than this one. But even if you got a 3 to 5% cash on cash return on a property like this, that'd be my guess. Is what kind of where it would be. Then the total return you're getting, like where the benefit of this is in a quality location. It attracts a tenant who will stay for a while. It's a lot easier to manage. The property tends to go up in value if you bought in the right location. You're paying the loan down over time, and you're getting a positive cash flow. And if you get a fixed interest payment, then as rent goes up over time, as prices go up over time, if it's a pretty good deal today, it's going to get better and better and better year by year because of the location you bought. So that to me it's a long-term wealth builder play. That's my impression of it. Ray, do you have any kind of other thoughts on looking back on your deals you've bought now and what they will help you do down the road?
Yeah, that's pretty much how I feel. I'm a beginner. I'm definitely not like an expert like you, and I can't really achieve all the numbers that you recommend. And just like you told me before, like going to a baseball game, I'm not looking for a home run, just hitting a one shot, one shot at a time. So as long as I have some cash flow, I'm making a long-term strategy on all of the properties. I'm not trying to do a short-term a rental. So as long as it has a good chance of having cash flow, have equity growth, and that should be okay for me. And so far, all of them so far is okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, just want to say congratulations. I mean, you've done 6-7 deals now in about a year, a little bit over a year's time, and you've done it by hitting base hits, like you said, hitting those singles. But you've done a lot of work. I mean, in the last year of all those steps we went over, building a team, learning the numbers. You were a brand new beginner before, and had to learn how to run the numbers, had to learn how to analyze a market. So just want to give you a pat on the back publicly for all the work you've done, and the team members that they have done as well. I'm just wondering, Ray, like for somebody who's kind of where you were 15 months ago or 14 months ago, are there any big lessons that stand out to you? Like anything that looking back, you're like, oh man, I wish I would have known that, or I'm really glad I learned that along the way?
Yeah, definitely. And there's a couple of mistakes I made. One of the mistake is that before we saw the first property, we saw another property at the same time, which has great pictures. We decided to make a offer with a $3,500 due diligence. And I guess the point is don't ever judge a book by its cover. So as soon as we send the inspector in there, they found out there's a foundational problem, and they did a lot of work to hide this kind of issue. There's a problem with the roof, a problem with the AC, and it was becoming expected to be a money pit, and eventually we had to walk away. So basically, I recommend all the investor out there, if you want to invest on property, make sure you have your agent and not just look at the picture, but actually go into the property to walk through the property to check out what's in there. Because a lot of times on Zillow, the pictures just shows what's the best, but a lot of things they don't show on the Zillow. You can't just if you're bidding sight unseen, it's very easy to make a mistake. For this property, we found out that when the inspector walked in, they found out they actually put a bar of a wood bar in the center of the hallway just to block the cracks of the floor. And certain parts of the floor is uneven, has a soft spot. So those are all indication of foundational problems.
Yeah. And you mentioned an inspector. So you have your real estate agent go through there to give you a video of everything, but then you also hire a third-party inspector on all your properties to go in and give you a report, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So very, very good advice. Anything else you can think of, Ray? Anything that you would advise people on when they're trying to get started, like you've done buying long distance?
I would say I was mostly inspired by your story. I remember one of the podcasts, actually, an article you wrote about a green trail in your town. You try to make the green trail to connect to the neighborhood, and you actually purchase a property and then negotiate with the sellers and fix it up, and so that the city can build a green trail through that property. So your bottom line is align your vision, your money, and people together to accomplish your goal. Like your motto says, do what matters, right? It stuck with me, and I realized real estate is just a vehicle. It's not the end game. It's just a vehicle to accomplish our goal. If we can do what matters, we have to align our vision, our money, our energy with the people, everything together, and do what matters. If you can do what matters today, that's most important.
Yeah. Well, you're living that, so you're a great example of that, Ray. I really appreciate your kind words on that, and just your example. I'm hoping your example will be helpful to people, and that they can benefit from the details. Like the fact that you're willing to share all the numbers and the details is always helpful when somebody's getting started. I think my last question related to your deals and this progress you made over the last year was there anything, particularly in the course, I guess, so if people considered joining the course with me and having me help them do it, was there anything particular that you felt was most helpful about that people could consider?
There's a couple of things. Course is very helpful. I appreciate it always teaches fundamentals, and for example, the rental analysis course, that's part of the component, is very, very important. We have to. I reviewed that course 3 times just to figure out how the Excel sheet works, and I'm still not the expert of it, And another thing is that you teach about the contract and all those little details that's in the contracts is very fundamental, and I never see any course teaching that before. So I really appreciate that, and this is something that all the investors had to learn. That's their real estate 101.
Yeah. The paperwork and the contracts don't make exactly like a sexy social media post. Nobody's that excited about looking at the details of how do you fill out a contract, but that really is important. So thank you for that feedback. So final thing here, Ray. Like I always like to look forward in the future. Like what's next for you? You just bought another property a week or two ago. You've got 7 properties now. Like what do you hope to see? And if we were to talk in 2023, the beginning of the year, what's next?
Next, I want to have more investment in multifamily properties because it has a better cash flow, and it has a much better ROI. And more importantly, I want to see my properties have grown enough equity so I can do more cash out refi, take out those equities and take out those cash to buy more properties.
Great. So you've got your good foundation. You bought 7 single family houses, buy a few more multifamily, and grow. And that's the beautiful part about it. You've learned a lot in the last year. You've built some wealth in the last year, and now you've got your feet wet in there, and you're ready to do more. So that's excellent. So Ray, thank you for your time on this. Really appreciate you being willing to share. If people were to, I'm going to have links to a lot of the things you talked about today, like some of the people you worked with. We'll have your property manager, your real estate agent. I know you wanted to give them a shout out as well. And the final question is just, do you have the people who are listening to this are going to be at various stages of their journey to financial independence. Some people at the very beginning, some people along the way, but more broadly than real estate, just on the financial journey. Do you have any tips for people who are kind of in the grind of trying to build wealth and learn how to invest? Any final tip for them?
Final tips is probably just learn. And I think the single most important asset we have is the ability to learn. And I didn't know I could learn real estate. And I was able to learn through all the courses, and I just appreciate all the experience once we learn, and we can continue to grow.
I love it. Do what matters and keep learning. That's a good motto for my life as well. I love it. So Ray, thanks so much. Look forward to staying in touch with you and hearing about your next deals, and hope you have a great day.
And to you. Thank you. Appreciate it.
If you like the show, I'd like to invite you to subscribe to my free email newsletter at coachcarson.com/REI toolkit. In addition to weekly updates, articles, and behind-the-scenes tips from me, my email newsletter subscribers get my real estate investing toolkit, which includes a property closing checklist that I actually use when I buy properties, a real estate deal worksheet, a tenant screening criteria checklist, and other spreadsheets and goodies that will help you on your journey to financial independence using real estate. You can get it all for free at coachcarson.com/REI toolkit. I also want to take this time to thank some people behind the scenes who make this podcast possible each and every week. This includes my podcast editor extraordinaire, Michael Wynn, my amazing virtual assistant, Megan Thompson, my wife, Carrie, who helps me behind the scenes and is my partner here at Coach Carson. And of course, thank you to all of you, the listeners of this show who make everything possible. This show exists for you. It exists because of you. And I really appreciate you being here for another episode. Everything I've shared with you in this episode has been for general education purposes. I have not considered your specific situation or risks. Before buying your own investments, be sure to consult a financial, real estate, and/or a legal professional. Until next time, I'm Chad Carson. You can also call me Coach, and this is a show all about helping you get out of the financial grind so you can do more of what matters. See you next time.